September the 1st, 1945. Dearest Mom, guess I came as close as possible to not writing in August, so I'll start out this month being the kind of son you deserve. I have so much to say, I doubt that I could get it all into one letter. I moved to Minnesota first, 1928, lived at 3811 11th Avenue. Even though we were living in a relatively segregated situation, all blacks that, at least on the south side of Minneapolis, we had some white friends, you know, and so gave us a kind of a different perspective, I think, than being totally and completely segregated and isolated from one another. We left Minneapolis and moved to Waukesha. Most of those youngsters and very many of the adults in Waukesha had never before seen or talked to an African American until our family moved there. And I can remember when I was maybe about 8 or perhaps 9 years old. And a little guy who lived down the street from me and was one of my best friends. He came to me one day and he said, I talked to my dad about colored people. He said, they're okay as long as they stay in their place. Now, he never considered me as a colored person. I was Nelson, right? I mean, and this is America, that they get to know somebody, they love them.
These are Americans under the front of democracy.
I was called up 2 weeks before graduation, and so I asked the officer if I could please graduate. So he gave me a delay en route, but I had to be in uniform. And so I finished my last 2 weeks in school in uniform, and I graduated in uniform. So, of course, we had on our purple robes and all that sort of thing. But at the bottom of those purple robes, people could see those khaki pants and, you know, brown military shoes. And so when I got my diploma, the first 2, and then 4, and then 8, and then the entire auditorium stood up and applauded. Not so much because none of them knew me, right? But it was kind of a salute to the young men who were going into the Army. I graduated from Central High School, and the night of my graduation, I was taken directly from the school directly to Fort Snelling, and from Fort Snelling to Fort Waukesha, Arizona.
An army was growing, for not only Britain had declared war, Canada.
I was culturally not very much of an African American when I went to this segregated division. You know, 18,000 African Americans who were sure enough African Americans, right out of the farms of Mississippi or the ghettos in Philadelphia. And of course, you know, at that time, you lived in Minneapolis, you had an accent of a Swede, right? I mean, yeah, you betcha. I can remember the first time somebody said something to me, and I said, like, yeah, you betcha. And what'd you say?
His army, he used another weapon, the propaganda barrage, to confuse, to make them lose faith, to divide and conquer.
The 93rd has been the first unit of the forces in the Pacific to accept a capitulation, has captured the highest-ranking troop commander in combat. We were also the first drafted division to contact the enemy.
First, let's take up the British.
General Patton and Eisenhower and these people in Europe made it clear, we will not accept any black combat troops. And the 93rd went over first. And so when they got over, Pershing refused to accept them. He said, his famous statement was, before I let a nigger kill a white man, I'll join the Germans. The white troops would not accept it. They wouldn't fight, or, you know, if blacks fought alongside of them. We didn't have a choice. That we had to fight Hitler. Hitler was underpinned the reaction in the United States, you know, on fascism in the United States. You could not defeat fascism in the United States without destroying the Nazi government of Germany. And I think that even if most of the African American young men couldn't articulate this, they understood it, and that's why they went to war. The longer that war went on, the more bitter became the relations between whites and blacks. When you're isolated from people, you believe anything about them. I mean, if you have if you're connected to them, you can always have concrete experiences that contradict certain things that just simply are not true. But when you're in an all-black organization here and all-white organizations over there, you tend to believe the very worst about each other. And it was why at the end of the war that we simply could not accept going back to where we were in 1940. That we had learned some things in that war, and those things had to be applied to life as it was beginning to develop at the end of the war. Getting back to civilian life was a traumatic thing for us, and I was one of the lucky ones because I came from a big family and a very close family, and three of us had been in service. So, and we all got back at just about the same time, and so we kind of leaned on each other. Practically all veterans suffer one way or another from depression. I certainly did. This thing that kept you going in the military, the camaraderie, the adrenaline, all these things, they're all of a sudden gone. And so this depression sets in. The revolutionary movement saved my life. I guess one of the reasons I joined the movement is that I just couldn't live a life anymore without a purpose. It had to have a mission. It had to have some reason to live. In 1947, I guess 46 when I joined the party, if you were going to fight for African American rights, there was only one place for you to do it in. And you had to be in the CP whether you agreed with them or not. You know, no matter what your attitude towards the Soviet Union or anything like that, that was not important. What was important was they're lynching people. When we come back from the war, there was this huge peace movement already underway. And so most of us who got involved in politically became involved basically through the peace movement. And because part of the peace movement was the struggle for African American rights. There's no way to have peace. And along with colonialism, and so the struggle for peace led to the struggle against imperialism and the struggle for humanity, you know, throughout the entire world. And one thing led to another, and finally it ended up with me joining the Communist Party. CP was of some influence. Not only was it of some influence, but it was making a lot of noise along the ways that we were struggling. That is for social equality, for economic rights, and so forth and so on. And also take into consideration, it's kind of hard to imagine it today, but the Communist Party was the only integrated national organization in the United States. I mean, can you imagine? There was no other organization, national organization in the United States that was integrated. That certainly not the church, the moral leader of America, right? The most segregated apparatus there was in the United States was the church. So if you're going to look for civil rights, don't join the church. You have to join something else. And people don't even consider these things, you know, today.
Petitioning for integrated schools.
That practically every civil rights struggle that was carried on in Minneapolis at all, or in Minnesota at all, was carried out by the CP. And so if you were going to be serious about the fight for equality, you were going to get around or in the Communist Party. That's all there was to it. We're a nation of revolutionaries. And what is a revolutionary? A person who refuses to tolerate injustice.